The containment chamber hummed with the same monotonous frequency it had maintained for 5 centuries. Marcus Chen pressed his weathered palm against the energy barrier that had been his prison wall since the day the hegemony captured him. His body remained frozen at 32 years old, courtesy of the alien stasis field that kept him alive, but aware through every agonizing moment of his imprisonment. The Valdorian hegemony had discovered Earth during humanity's first tentative steps into interstellar space. What they found was a species that defied every biological and psychological model in their vast databases. Humans possessed an inexplicable ability to adapt, survive, and thrive in conditions that would destroy other sentient races. More disturbing to the hegemony was humanity's tendency to form emotional bonds that transcended logic, driving them to perform impossible feats when protecting others. Marcus had been the commander of the exploration vessel Endeavor when the hegemony struck. His crew of 200 souls had fought valiantly, but primitive human technology proved no match for weapons that could disintegrate matter at the quantum level. As his ship burned around him, Marcus had made the decision that would haunt him for 500 years. He surrendered himself to the enemy in exchange for his crew's lives. The Valdorians, tall reptilian beings with crystalline growths sprouting from their skulls, were fascinated by this act of self-sacrifice. Their society functioned on pure logical efficiency. The concept of one individual willingly accepting doom to save others violated their understanding of natural selection. They needed to study this anomaly. High researcher Zeftar became Marcus's primary tormentor and observer. Standing 8 feet tall with scales that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on his mood, the alien spent decades conducting experiments designed to break human psychological barriers. He subjected Marcus to simulated scenarios where helping others would cause him pain, tested his reactions to impossible moral choices, and analyzed every neural pathway firing in his brain. "Your species continues to perplex us, human," Zeftar would say during their sessions, his voice a harsh whisper through universal translators. "You maintain hope despite overwhelming evidence that rescue will never come. You refuse to cooperate even when we offer improved conditions. Most fascinating of all, you somehow find ways to encourage our other test subjects, despite being unable to communicate with them directly." Marcus discovered that his cell occupied just one section of a massive research facility. Through careful observation of guard movements and overheard conversations, he pieced together that hundreds of species were imprisoned here. The hegemony collected representatives from every civilization they conquered, studying their unique traits to better understand how to control or eliminate them. The facility orbited a dying star in a system the hegemony had stripped of resources. The star's irregular energy emissions made faster-than-light communication impossible, ensuring perfect isolation. No one would ever find this place by accident. Years became decades, decades became centuries. Marcus watched guard rotations change as younger Valdorians replaced their elders. He memorized every sound, every vibration, every subtle shift in the facility's operations. His human mind, enhanced by the stasis field's preservation effects, became a living computer dedicated to one purpose: finding a way to free everyone trapped in this nightmare. During his 4th century of imprisonment, Marcus began noticing concerning changes in his captor's behavior. Conversations between guards grew more agitated. Zeftar's experiments became increasingly desperate, as if he were racing against an unseen deadline. The facility's defense systems underwent constant upgrades, transforming the research station into a fortress. "The Devourers have consumed the 7th sector," Marcus overheard one guard telling another. 3 entire star systems gone. Nothing left but empty space. The Devourers. Marcus filed away every mention of this mysterious threat. From scattered conversations, he learned that something was systematically destroying hegemony territory. Worlds weren't just conquered, but completely consumed, leaving behind regions of space so thoroughly stripped that not even cosmic dust remained. Zeftar's final experiment took place during Marcus's 499th year of captivity. The alien researcher appeared more agitated than ever, his scales flickering rapidly between colors. "Tell me, human, what drives your species to fight impossible odds? Our models predict you should have broken centuries ago, yet you remain defiant. The Devourers approach our core systems, and we need to understand what makes a species truly unstoppable." Marcus smiled grimly. "You want to know what makes humans special? We remember. Every friend lost, every world burned, every injustice suffered. We carry all of it forward, and it makes us stronger instead of breaking us. Your Devourers might destroy your empire, but they'll find that consuming everything just makes room for something better to grow." Zeftar's scales went completely black. "Impossible. Hope cannot survive 500 years of futility. Watch me." The researcher left that day and never returned. Marcus sensed the facility's routines changing around him. Fewer guards walked the corridors. Emergency drills became daily occurrences. His captors were preparing for something catastrophic. On the morning of his 500th year and first day of imprisonment, Marcus woke to silence. The facility's constant background hum had stopped. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. Through his cell's small observation window, he could see stars moving in patterns that defied physics. The Devourers had arrived. Marcus pressed against his energy barrier and watched reality tear apart outside his prison. Massive serpentine forms, each easily the size of Earth's moon, writhed through space with impossible grace. Their scales seemed to absorb light itself, making them appear as living voids outlined by the dying star's radiation. These were the Devourers, and they had come to feed. The facility shook as the first dragon latched onto its outer hull. Metal screamed and atmosphere rushed away as sections of the station were simply torn free and consumed. Marcus watched in fascination as these cosmic predators didn't just destroy, but absorbed everything they touched, growing larger with each bite. Valdorian defense systems activated automatically, filling space with energy weapons that could vaporize asteroids. The Devourers ignored the attacks completely. Energy beams struck their scales and vanished without effect. Kinetic projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed simply bounced off their hide. Through the chaos, Marcus heard something impossible. Emergency protocols were releasing containment fields throughout the facility. Every cell, every prison, every carefully maintained barrier was powering down simultaneously. The station's computer systems were prioritizing structural integrity over security, freeing hundreds of captive species in a desperate attempt to maintain life support. His own energy barrier flickered and died. Marcus stepped out of his cell for the first time in 5 centuries, breathing unfiltered air and feeling artificial gravity beneath his feet. Around him, creatures from dozens of worlds were emerging from their own prisons, all equally stunned by their unexpected freedom. A klaxon alarm echoed through the corridors as automated systems announced the facility's imminent destruction. Marcus had perhaps an hour before the Devourers consumed enough of the station to cause total structural collapse. An hour to accomplish what he'd dreamed of for 500 years. He began to run toward the facility's central computer core, knowing that his real story was just beginning. Marcus navigated corridors he'd only seen through security monitors during his imprisonment. 500 years of observation had given him an intimate knowledge of the facility's layout, but experiencing it firsthand while the station shook apart around him proved disorienting. Emergency lighting cast shifting shadows as the Devourers continued their relentless feeding outside. Other freed captives moved through the hallways like ghosts, many too traumatized by centuries of imprisonment to comprehend their sudden liberation. Marcus recognized species from across the galaxy, the crystalline Etherians whose bodies chimed with each movement, furry Kelthari who communicated through scent, and dozens of others whose names he'd never learned. All bore the same hollow expression of beings who'd given up hope long ago. "Wait!" Marcus called out in Standard Galactic, stopping a group of Etherians who were wandering aimlessly toward a section already consumed by the dragons. "The outer rings are compromised. We need to move toward the core." One of the Etherians, her crystalline body pulsing with faint blue light, turned toward him with confusion. "Human? But you were the first specimen. How do you possess knowledge of current facility status?" "I've been watching and learning for 5 centuries, Marcus replied, gently guiding them away from danger. "Trust me. I know where we need to go." As they moved deeper into the station, Marcus gathered more survivors. His natural leadership abilities, honed during his military career and refined by centuries of planning, drew others to follow him. Soon he led a group of 30 beings representing 15 different species, all looking to him for guidance in this impossible situation. The facility's computer core lay 3 levels down from Marcus's former cell block. Getting there meant traversing sections where the Devourers had already begun their feast. Marcus led his group through maintenance tunnels, following routes that would keep them away from the most heavily damaged areas. "Human Marcus," spoke Voltar, a Kelthari, whose blue fur had turned gray from stress during his 2-century imprisonment. "Why do you seek the computer core? Should we not find escape pods?" Marcus paused at a junction where one tunnel led toward the hangar bay, while another descended toward their destination. "The hegemony stripped this facility's escape systems decades ago. They were afraid their own researchers might try to flee with stolen data. Our only chance is to send a signal to my people." "Your people?" asked Solara, an Etherian whose chimes carried notes of disbelief. "Human civilization was primitive when we were captured. They possessed no interstellar communication networks." A bitter smile crossed Marcus's face. "You'd be surprised what humans can accomplish in 500 years when someone they care about goes missing." The truth was more complex than Marcus let on. During his imprisonment, he'd intercepted fragments of hegemony communications about humanity's unexpected technological progress. Earth had not accepted the loss of the Endeavor quietly. Instead, Marcus's sacrifice had galvanized his entire species into a technological revolution driven by the singular goal of finding and rescuing him. Within a century of his capture, humanity had reverse-engineered hegemony technology from wreckage left behind after their initial attack. Within 2 centuries, human scout ships were conducting deep space reconnaissance missions. By Marcus's 300th year of imprisonment, humanity controlled a dozen star systems and commanded fleets that made the hegemony nervous. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. His captivity had taught the hegemony to fear human determination, but they failed to understand that this same determination was building an unstoppable rescue force across the galaxy. They reached the computer core just as another section of the facility was consumed by the Devourers. The massive quantum processing center hummed with desperate activity as automated systems tried to maintain basic life support while structural supports failed around them. Marcus approached the primary console, grateful that his years of observing guard procedures had taught him basic hegemony operating protocols. "Voltar, I need you to monitor the entrances," Marcus ordered. "Solara, can your people interface directly with crystalline memory cores?" The Etherian's body chimed with surprise. "Yes, but such connections are dangerous. The feedback could shatter my consciousness." "I'm not asking you to do anything I wouldn't do myself," Marcus replied, beginning to work on the console. "We're all probably going to die in the next few minutes anyway. Might as well make it count for something." What Marcus didn't tell them was that he'd been planning this exact scenario for decades. He'd memorized every detail of the hegemony's communication protocols, their encryption methods, and most importantly, the location of humanity's current territories. If he could access the facility's deep space communication array, he could send a message that would reach human forces within weeks. The console responded to his inputs, displaying holographic interfaces in Valdorian script that he'd learned to read during countless hours of observation. Marcus began composing his message, embedding it with authentication codes from his original mission and tactical information about the facility's location. Human, the structure integrity is failing faster, Voltar called from his position near the entrance. These devourers seem to be accelerating their consumption rate. Through the computer's external sensors, Marcus could see why. The cosmic dragons weren't just feeding randomly. They moved with purpose, systematically consuming specific sections of the facility that contained the most concentrated energy sources. They were learning the station's design as they devoured it, becoming more efficient with each bite. Fascinating, Marcus muttered, adding this observation to his message. They're not mindless beasts. They're intelligent enough to optimize their feeding patterns. You find our impending doom fascinating? Solara asked, her crystalline form chiming with stress harmonics. Everything is data, Marcus replied, continuing to work. If I'm going to die, I might as well make sure the information dies with me reaches someone who can use it. The communication array came online just as the devourers reached the facility's power core. Marcus felt the deck shifting beneath his feet as gravitational fields fluctuated. He had perhaps minutes before the entire station collapsed into the feeding dragons' mouths. His message was complete. Coordinates for the facility, tactical analysis of the devourers, a full roster of captive species that might still need rescue, and most importantly, proof that Marcus Chen was still alive after 5 centuries of imprisonment. Message ready for transmission, he announced. Solara, I need you to interface with the communication core and boost the signal strength beyond normal parameters. We need this to reach human space, even if it burns out every relay in the process. The Etherian approached the crystalline interface with obvious fear. Such an action will certainly destroy my neural pathways. I know. I'm sorry. No, Solara said, her body beginning to glow as she made the connection. I understand now why your species fascinates the hegemony. You carry the weight of necessary sacrifices without losing your compassion. I choose to do this. Her crystalline form blazed with light as she channeled energy directly into the communication array. The facility's entire power grid surged, causing lights to flicker throughout the station. Marcus watched the transmission progress indicator climb toward completion as Solara's body began to crack under the strain. Transmission at 80%, Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. You're doing great, Solara. The Etherian's form was fracturing now, brilliant light leaking through expanding cracks in her crystalline structure. But she held on, pouring her life force into ensuring Marcus's message would reach its destination. 95%, Marcus called out. Almost there. The facility lurched violently as a devourer consumed the primary structural support. Gravity generators failed, sending debris floating through the air. Marcus grabbed onto the console, fighting to maintain contact with the communication array. 100%, he shouted triumphantly. Message transmitted. Solara's body exploded into 1,000,000 points of light that danced briefly through the air before fading. Her sacrifice had ensured that somewhere across the galaxy, human monitoring stations were receiving Marcus's message and learning that their lost commander still lived. The floor beneath them began to crack as the devourers reached their level. Marcus looked at Voltar and the remaining survivors, all of whom were staring at him with expressions of awe and terror. Well, Marcus said, straightening his uniform jacket that had somehow survived 5 centuries of imprisonment, Now we find out if humans really are as stubborn as I told them we were." Outside the shattered viewports, the cosmic dragons continued their feast, unaware that their actions had just triggered the rescue of a man whose people had been searching for him for 500 years. The rescue fleet arrived with the subtlety of a supernova. 14 days after Marcus transmitted his message, reality tore open near the dying star system as humanity's most advanced vessels emerged from hyperspace. The sight that greeted them defied every military projection. Cosmic dragons the size of moons had reduced the hegemony research facility to a half-consumed skeleton, yet somehow life signs still registered from within the wreckage. Admiral Sarah Chen, Marcus's own daughter who had spent her entire life rising through military ranks to find her father, stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution and stared at the impossible scene before them. The dragons that had terrorized hegemony space ignored the human fleet entirely, continuing their methodical consumption of the station as if million-ton warships were beneath their notice. "Ma'am," reported Commander Hayes from the tactical station, "we're reading the source beacon from the facility's remaining core sections. Commander Chen's signal originated from there." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 5 centuries of searching. Her father had been declared dead when she was 7 years old. She joined the military specifically to find him, following leads and rumors across the galaxy. Every promotion had been earned with the single goal of gaining access to better ships, better technology, better intelligence networks. "Launch rescue shuttles," she ordered. "Full defensive screens, but do not engage the dragons unless they threaten our people directly." The human fleet had learned much about the Devourers during their rampage across hegemony territory. Unlike other species that tried to fight them directly, humanity had observed and adapted. They discovered that the cosmic dragons seemed to feed exclusively on exotic matter and high-energy systems. Standard matter, like human bodies and basic technology, didn't register as food sources. This knowledge had shaped humanity's rescue strategy. The shuttles launching toward the facility carried minimal energy signatures, powered by simple chemical rockets rather than fusion drives. Their crews wore environmental suits with passive life support systems that produced no electromagnetic emissions. To the Devourers, they would appear as uninteresting as floating debris. Marcus felt the facility's final death throes as support structures failed around him. He'd managed to keep 17 survivors alive by leading them to a section that the dragons had ignored, a waste processing center with no valuable energy sources. The irony of surviving 5 centuries in a luxurious prison only to spend his final hours hiding in an alien sewer wasn't lost on him. Voltar's sensitive nose detected the change first. "Human Marcus. I sense unfamiliar atmospheric signatures. New technology." Marcus pressed his face to a tiny viewport and felt his heart stop. Sleek shuttles bearing the unmistakable geometric patterns of human military vessels were maneuvering through the wreckage, searching methodically through each remaining section. He could see suited figures moving with practiced efficiency, clearly experienced in zero-gravity rescue operations. "Impossible," he whispered. "How did they find us so quickly?" The truth was that humanity had positioned monitoring stations throughout hegemony space, waiting for any signal that might lead them to Marcus. His transmission had triggered the largest rescue operation in human history, involving every available military asset. One of the shuttles approached their section, and Marcus could see a figure in a command suit directing the operation. Something about the person's movements seemed familiar, though he couldn't identify why. The rescue team began cutting through the damaged hull plates with precision laser tools. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Human Expeditionary Fleet," a voice announced through emergency frequencies. "We're here for Marcus Chen and any survivors. Please respond if you can hear this message." Marcus's breath caught. Sarah, his little Sarah, who'd been just a child when he left on his final mission. The voice was older, harder, carrying the authority of command, but he could still hear echoes of the 7-year-old who used to beg him for bedtime stories about exploring the stars. "This is Marcus Chen," he replied, his voice breaking slightly. "I have 16 survivors with me. We're in the waste processing section, level 7. The silence that followed lasted forever. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper through the communicator. "Is it really you?" "It's me, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took so long to come home." The rescue proceeded with military efficiency, but Marcus could hear the controlled emotion in every order his daughter gave. The cutting tools made quick work of the damaged hull, and soon suited figures were floating into their improvised shelter. Marcus recognized the lead figure immediately, despite the environmental suit and 5 centuries of separation. Sarah Chen had grown into the commanding officer Marcus had always known she could become. Even through her suit's faceplate, he could see the determination that had driven her across the galaxy to find him. She moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to zero-gravity operations, directing her team to assist the alien survivors while approaching Marcus herself. "Commander Chen," she said formally, though her voice shook slightly, "you're under orders to report for medical evaluation and debriefing." Marcus smiled at her attempt to maintain military protocol. "Yes, ma'am. Though I should warn you, I have a lot to report." As the human rescue teams evacuated the survivors, Marcus found himself looking back at the cosmic dragons that had inadvertently freed him. The massive creatures continued feeding on the facility's remains, completely indifferent to the human ships nearby. Something about their behavior patterns nagged at his tactical mind. "Sarah," he said as they boarded the shuttle, "how long have these dragons been attacking hegemony space?" "About 50 years. They appeared suddenly and started consuming entire star systems. The hegemony has lost nearly a third of their territory." Marcus processed this information as the shuttle departed the dying facility. 50 years ago would have coincided with humanity's first major expansion into former hegemony space. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. "Have the dragons ever attacked human colonies?" he asked. "Never. They seem to avoid our space entirely. Intelligence thinks it's because we use different technology than the hegemony." Marcus suspected the truth was more complex. During his imprisonment, he'd learned that the hegemony's expansion had displaced dozens of species across the galaxy. They'd strip-mined worlds, enslaved populations, and destroyed entire civilizations to fuel their empire's growth. The dragons weren't random destroyers. They were something else entirely. The shuttle docked with the Retribution, and Marcus experienced artificial gravity for the first time in 2 weeks. His legs, strengthened by 5 centuries of involuntary exercise in his prison cell, easily supported his weight. The stasis field had preserved him perfectly, leaving him physically unchanged from the day of his capture. The ship's corridors bustled with activity as the rescued survivors were taken to medical facilities. Marcus noticed that his daughter had assembled a crew representing dozens of species, many of them refugees from worlds the hegemony had destroyed. Humanity hadn't just built a rescue fleet. They'd become leaders of an interstellar coalition. "The galaxy has changed significantly since your capture," Sarah explained as they walked toward her ready room. "After we lost you, humanity realized we couldn't remain isolated. We formed alliances with every species the hegemony oppressed." "And the dragons?" Sarah paused at her ready room door. "They're the reason we were able to build these alliances. Every world the dragons consume reduces hegemony power, giving the rest of us room to grow. Some of our allies think the dragons are a natural balancing force." Marcus considered this as they entered the ready room. The space was functional but personal, decorated with star charts marking humanity's expansion, and he noticed a small framed photo of a 7-year-old girl hugging her father before his final mission. The survivors I rescued mentioned something interesting, Marcus said, accepting a cup of real Earth coffee that tasted like heaven after 5 centuries of recycled nutrients. They said the dragons appeared around the same time humanity began expanding into this region of space. Sarah nodded slowly. Our xenobiologists have theories about that. They think the dragons might be attracted to areas of rapid political change. Or, Marcus said quietly, they're intelligent enough to recognize when a species is ready to replace another in the galactic hierarchy. The implications hung between them. If Marcus was correct, the dragons weren't randomly destroying the hegemony. They were making room for humanity to expand, clearing away a civilization that had become stagnant and oppressive to allow something newer and more dynamic to grow. There's something else, Sarah said, activating a holographic display that showed human space. We've been intercepting hegemony communications. They're not just afraid of the dragons anymore, they're afraid of us. The display showed human territory stretching across dozens of star systems, connected by trade routes and defended by fleets that incorporated technology from dozens of allied species. In 5 centuries, humanity had grown from a single world into an interstellar power that rivaled the hegemony's strength. They call us the inheritors, Sarah continued. Their intelligence reports claim that humans were specifically created to replace them as the dominant galactic civilization. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying 5 centuries of accumulated irony. They spent all that time studying me to understand human nature, and they still don't get it. We weren't created to replace them. We're just too stubborn to let them keep hurting people. Through the Ready Room's viewport, Marcus could see the cosmic dragons finishing their feast. The facility where he'd spent 500 years was now nothing but empty space. Soon, the dragons would move on to their next target, continuing their methodical dismantling of the hegemony's empire. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Marcus asked, using his daughter's proper rank. Sarah smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the child he'd left behind. "We're going home, Dad. You've got about 500 years of catching up to do, and I want to introduce you to your grandchildren." As the human fleet prepared to depart, Marcus took one last look at the space where his prison had been. Somewhere in those coordinates, Solara had sacrificed herself to ensure his message reached home. Her death had saved not just Marcus, but potentially every species oppressed by the hegemony. The cosmic dragons had given him freedom, but it was human determination and alien sacrifice that had given him hope. The Retribution entered hyperspace, carrying Marcus home to a humanity that had never stopped looking for him. Behind them, the dragons continued their ancient work, systematically dismantling an empire that had forgotten how to grow. In the vast cosmic dance of civilizations rising and falling, sometimes freedom came from the most unexpected sources. Marcus Chen was finally going home,